2020, a year Susan wouldn't forget. This was the year she got her first pet bird. She'd begged her parents for a bird, and she swore she researched how to take care of a bird. That turned out differently. Susan was ambitious. When I say ambitious, I mean it. She would always put herself up to do these insane tasks, and she never completed them. Like for instance, Susan had the idea to build the tallest tower in the world. Long story short, it ended up being 6 feet tall. Alright, back to the bird. When Susan got this bird, she leaped with joy. She was so happy with the parakeet her parents got her. She would take care of it each and every day with so much kindness. Now that's what I wish I could have written, but no, sadly, Susan sucked at taking care of this bird. So, let's do some math. If a girl sucks at taking care of a bird and this bird is somehow super smart, it's probably going to end up a disaster. And friends, I'm sorry to inform you that it did end up disastrous. One day, Susan's parents weren't home, and she and her parakeet were talking. Side note, she hadn't named her parakeet, because she didn't want to. Why? I don't know. Anyways, they were talking, and Susan let her parakeet out of its cage so she could give it a treat. Well, it turns out you should never ever leave a really smart parakeet out of its cage when your parents aren't home. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because your extremely smart parakeet will fly out your door into the living room. That doesn't seem that bad. But let me tell you something, it's horrible when you realize that you accidentally left your window in the kitchen open. You might be asking yourself, why? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because your parakeet will fly out the freaking window. Now our Susan was shocked, scared, and worried. I mean, who wouldn't if they just lost their pet? Now since her parents weren't home, she called 911. After being hung up on twice, because not being able to find a bird wasn't an emergency, she sat on the couch and thought. Susan knew that chasing the bird would be ridiculous. She also knew that calling her parents wouldn't make it any better. So she decided to leave the house and search for this bird, even though it was ridiculous. As she went around the blocks of her neighborhood, she went around asking people if they'd seen her parakeet. Only one person said that they'd seen her bird go towards downtown. So as any sensible person would, Susan headed downtown. Once she got downtown, she asked more people. At one point, she got famished and sat down at a cafe for some coffee and a sandwich. A strange fellow sat down next to her. So she got up and moved to a table across. The person proceeded to move to her table again. She asked, "Excuse me, sir, do you need something?" There was no response. Susan decided to just keep wandering around downtown and forget about this strange fellow. She continued downtown and stopped at an alleyway and looked down it. Even though Susan didn't know how to take care of a bird, she knew that hers might hide in this alleyway. She looked down the alleyway and thought she saw her bird. She ran down the alley and realized that it wasn't her bird. It was a bright green shirt hanging. So with defeat, she walked out of the alley when she realized she couldn't get out. She'd been trapped. She didn't know what to do. She pulled her phone out to find that she didn't have any cell service. Susan panicked. And like all panicked people who are trapped in an alley, she screamed. Susan had watched Batman before, and she seriously didn't want to end up like Batman's parents. She kept screaming and screaming for help, but no one answered. So our Susan ultimately gave up. About 35 minutes later, she knew she needed to get home. So she climbed over the wall that was trapping her in the alley and hopped onto the sidewalk. She quickly looked around and there she saw it, her bird. She was so happy. But she was displeased when she saw it was in the hands of the creepy man who'd kept following her at the cafe. So Susan confronted the man and tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around, and he did not look good at all. He had cuts, scratches, and scars all over his face. So our Susan did what any person would do when they saw their beloved pet in a creep's hands. She snatched her bird out of the man's hands and ran home. The man quickly turned around and darted after her. Susan looked back and knew she had to create some sort of a diversion. So she looked around and ran into a coffee shop. The man realized what she was doing, so he grabbed a newspaper off the street side, sat down at a table, and acted like he was reading it. He actually gave Susan side glares as he was pretending to read. Susan caught her breath and thought about her options. Option 1, go out the front door and pray that the man wouldn't follow her. Option 2, run out the back door of the coffee shop. Option 3, hide out in the coffee shop until it closed and then run home. She knew that options 1 and 3 were risky, so she went with option 2. Deciding to go with option 2, Susan ran out the back door toward her home. As she glanced back, she saw that the man had no clue she was gone. Suddenly she realized that he did recognize her because he didn't see her anymore, but luckily, he didn't know which direction Susan had gone in. Out of breath, Susan opened the door to her home and gave a sigh of relief. She quickly closed all the windows that were open and put her parakeet back in her cage. Luckily, her parents weren't home, so she didn't have to tell them about it. Susan went to bed that night thinking about her day's events, and she realized that she should probably look up how to take care of her bird. And friends, I'm glad to inform you that she did research about her bird.